Did you know that the first murder in history was punished with a mark of protection? That's right. The story of Cain and Abel reveals a side of God that few dare to explore, unrelenting justice intertwined with inexplicable mercy. But why did God choose to protect humanity's first murderer? What you'll uncover in this video could completely transform your understanding of divine justice and grace. Stay with us until the end to unravel the true purpose behind the mark that defined Cain forever. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in a deep crimson hue that seemed to mirror the tragedy that had just unfolded. In an isolated field, Cain stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the lifeless body of his brother, Abel. The air grew heavy, as though the earth itself bore the weight of the sin that had just been committed. Cain's hands, stained with blood, trembled slightly as his mind replayed the scene. The uncontrollable rage, Abel's cry, and then utter silence. Breathing heavily, Cain tried to convince himself it was all a terrible dream, but the reality was undeniable. On the ground, Abel's body lay still, and from the earth, the spilled blood seemed to cry out with a voice that only heaven could hear. It was then that a penetrating, authoritative voice broke the silence. "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain flinched at the divine voice. He knew its source, but could not face the truth. Swallowing hard, his heart pounding, he replied with a tone attempting indifference. "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The air seemed to freeze. God's voice echoed again, this time with a tone even more solemn. "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." These words struck Cain's soul like a hammer on stone. There was no place to hide, no excuse to erase what had already been done. His guilt was undeniable. He looked again at Abel's body and felt a knot tighten in his stomach, yet his pride kept him from fully admitting his sin. Inside, he wrestled fiercely between remorse and denial. God's voice was not only accusatory, but also profoundly sorrowful, as if the Creator himself shared the anguish of witnessing the first murder among his children. The earth, now soaked with innocent blood, had become an eternal witness to the crime. Cain, though reluctant, began to grasp the enormity of his actions. However, he was far from ready to face the consequences that awaited him. The silence following God's accusation was almost unbearable. Cain felt the air around him grow thick, as though creation itself was turning against him. He wanted to respond, but could find no words. Finally, God spoke again, his voice thundering deep within Cain. "Now you are cursed and banished from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain heard these words with growing despair. The punishment was clear, irreversible, and its impact devastating. He had dedicated his life to the land, cultivating it, making it fruitful, and now that connection was stripped away from him. In an instant, everything he knew, everything that gave him purpose, was taken. He tried to justify his actions in his mind, but he knew there were no excuses sufficient to stand against divine judgment. Cain's eyes filled with both fury and fear. Though he acknowledged God's absolute power, his pride refused to let him fully accept his guilt. Inside, a rebellious voice shouted, "This isn't fair!" Yet at the same time, another part of him knew he deserved the punishment. This inner conflict consumed him, leaving him in a state of confusion and turmoil. God continued speaking, his tone firm yet laced with sorrow. "Innocent blood bears a weight that even the earth cannot endure. Your act has left a scar upon creation itself, and your name will be remembered as that of a wanderer." Cain lowered his gaze, his pride wounded and his spirit broken. He could no longer withstand the direct confrontation with his Creator. The weight of God's words pressed on him like a crushing mountain, and for the first time since the act, the enormity of his sin began to sink into his heart. Yet, there was still a spark of resistance within him, one that kept him from fully surrendering to the truth. As God's words hung heavy in the air, Cain realized his life would never be the same. He had crossed a line that could not be undone, and now he faced an uncertain future, marked by his crime and severed from divine blessing. Cain fell to his knees, unable to contain the torrent of emotions consuming him. His pride began to crumble under the weight of his fear. With a trembling voice, he lifted his eyes to the heavens and cried out, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you have driven me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me." These words, laden with anguish, revealed the depths of his fear. Although Cain had committed an atrocious act, the instinct for survival still burned within him. The thought of wandering aimlessly, without a home, and under the constant threat of death filled him with panic. For the first time, the facade of strength he had tried to maintain shattered completely. Cain's outcry was not just a cry of fear, but also one of partial remorse, mixed with self-pity. He could not accept that his fate was sealed in such a way. The life he once knew had turned into a nightmare, and he saw no way out. God looked upon Cain with a blend of justice and mercy. He knew the punishment had to be carried out, but he also understood the fragility of the human soul. With a solemn voice, God replied to Cain, "It will not be so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." These words brought a glimmer of relief to Cain, though his situation remained tragic. For a brief moment, he felt that God's mercy had not completely abandoned him. However, he knew his life would forever be marked, not just by his crime, but also by the protection God now extended to him. As Cain slowly rose to his feet, his mind swirled with questions. What did it truly mean to be a wanderer? Could he ever find any form of redemption? Though he did not say it aloud, a small part of him longed to find some kind of purpose amid his condemnation. In his infinite wisdom, God understood that merely declaring Cain's protection was not enough. The fear that gripped Cain's heart required something tangible, something that would serve as a constant reminder of God's promise. So the Lord placed a mark on Cain, an act that could not be ignored. The sacred text does not detail the nature of the mark, but its effect was undeniable. It might have been a change in his physical appearance, a visible symbol, or even an aura that others could sense. What was certain is that this mark not only protected Cain from his enemies, but also served as a perpetual reminder of God's sovereignty and the consequences of his actions. Cain touched his body, uncertainly searching for the spot where the mark had been placed. Although he didn't fully comprehend its nature, he felt a strange weight upon him, as if his very existence had been permanently altered. The mark was not merely a shield, it was also a reminder of his sin and the judgment he had faced. God spoke once more, his voice blending authority with compassion. "This mark will ensure that no one kills you. But remember, Cain, the earth will not give you rest. You will be a wanderer, a living testament to the fact that sin comes at a cost." Cain did not respond. His mind was torn between relief and sorrow. Though he had received protection, he knew his life would be a constant struggle against loneliness and regret. The mark, visible to all, symbolized both God's mercy and his justice. Cain began his journey to Nod, a land east of Eden, unknown and unfamiliar. As he moved forward, his heart filled with an indescribable sorrow. Left behind were the fields he had cultivated, the places where he had shared laughter with his family, and the tangible presence of God. Now all that remained was the echo of his condemnation and the weight of the mark he carried. The landscape around him was barren and desolate, mirroring his inner state. Each step felt like a reminder of his isolation, of the rift between him and creation. The days stretched endlessly, and the nights were filled with silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind. At times, he thought he could hear Abel's voice calling out to him, but he knew it was just his mind playing tricks. On his journey, Cain found brief moments of reflection. Though he would not openly admit it, he began to realize that the life he now led was the direct result of his own choices. The land was no longer his ally. The people he encountered looked at him with fear and disdain. The weight of the mark was so heavy it seemed to cast a shadow over everything he did. As Cain wandered farther from Eden, he wondered if he would ever find peace. Although the initial fear of being killed had subsided, the emotional burden only grew heavier. His exile was not merely physical, it was spiritual and emotional, a complete disconnection from everything he had once known. As Cain continued his journey, the nature of the mark God had given him became increasingly evident. It was not simply a symbol of protection, it was a constant reminder of his sin and a silent proclamation of God's perfect balance between justice and mercy. Those who crossed his path felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. No one dared to approach him too closely, much less harm him. The mark spoke for itself, conveying a message beyond words. In moments of solitude, Cain reflected on the purpose of this mark. While it guaranteed his safety, it also set him apart. It became a barrier, isolating him from others, serving as a continual reminder of the cost of his decisions. Whenever he caught his reflection in the water or touched his skin, he felt the weight of the mark. The mark was not just a shield for his life, it was also a symbol of the lesson God intended to teach the world. Days and nights passed, and Cain wondered whether the mark was an act of grace or a burden he was destined to bear forever. Eventually, he began to understand that it could be both at once. The mark was a reminder that God had not completely abandoned him, but it was also evidence that sin would not go unpunished. As the story of the mark was passed down through generations, it gained even deeper significance. Humanity came to see that it was not just about Cain, but a universal message. God is just, but he is also merciful. The mark became a symbol of hope for some and a warning for others, emphasizing that even in judgment, God provides a way to learn and reflect. Cain, though he never stopped feeling separated, began to accept his role as a living reminder of these truths. Despite his isolation, he knew that his story would serve as both a warning and a lesson for those who came after him. While he could not undo what he had done, he understood that the mark gave him a purpose in the midst of his condemnation. The story of Cain and the mark God gave him became an enduring lesson for humanity. Through generations, it was told as a reminder of the danger of succumbing to anger, the weight of sin, and the consequences that can last a lifetime. But it was also shared as an example of divine mercy, extending even to those who have fallen the farthest. The central message of the story highlights the importance of repentance and reconciliation. Though Cain never returned to live in God's presence, his life served as a warning to others. Sin does not only affect the one who commits it, but also the land, the community, and the relationship with the Creator. Yet, even in punishment, God's mercy is present, offering protection and time for reflection. For those who hear this story today, its meaning remains as relevant as ever. The mark of Cain is a call to remember that our actions have consequences, but also that God's grace is available even in our darkest moments. It is a reminder that divine judgment is not arbitrary, but deeply just and filled with purpose. Cain's life ended as a wanderer, an exile, but his legacy as a symbol of warning and spiritual teaching endures. His story challenges us to reflect on our own lives, our choices, and how we respond to God's voice when he confronts us. Through Cain, we learn that while sin may distance us from God's presence, his grace and justice never leave us without a lesson to learn. What did this story of Cain and God's mark teach you? Reflecting on themes like sin, justice, and mercy can transform the way we face our own decisions. If this message resonated with you, imagine all that is still left for us to uncover together. Here, we explore the Bible's deepest stories, unraveling life lessons that can change your perspective forever. Don't stop with this video. Give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, share this message with someone who needs it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our content. This is just the beginning of a journey filled with faith, wisdom, and transformation. See you in the next video.